Well, hello. Today I get to interview Nancy Lucchese, and she is hoping to share her story so that she can encourage someone else that maybe has been down this same road and to look ahead, to be hopeful for what is possible. So, Nancy, thank you so much for joining me today and being vulnerable and open to share a little bit of your story with us today.
Oh, thank you, Krista. I hope this helps somebody. That's the goal today.
Well, and that's what we're about on this podcast, Life Empowered, to encourage, inspire, and empower others to look ahead and grow and bloom into who they were created to be. So, Nancy, can you give us a little background, kind of the background picture of where you came from before this struggle and season of pain happened?
Mhm. Sure. I grew up in just a typical American home. I had I two wonderful parents, and then I have an older brother, and yes, we even had a dog. And it was just life was good. And we were your typical family. Dad worked, mom stayed at home. Mom actually eventually started working with dad. This is what I saw. I went to good schools, good public schools. I had friends, went to college, and my life was on the right track. And I traveled all over the United States with the job that I ended up getting after college. And then eventually I wanted to settle down, and I kind of followed into the family business. So things were good.
Yeah, that sounds good. That sounds, the American dream, right? Good
It's,
family, loved you, and how fun you got to travel the world. Now, that's something I'd be a little jealous of. I love to travel and don't get to travel hardly at all. So again, you wanted to settle down, and so you were looking for the right man. How did that happen?
and that was interesting. So this was back in the day when the internet did not exist.
Oh
And
my, we're gonna freak out some people now.
I
No
know, right?
internet.
There
What
was
world is this?
Yes, for all of you millennials out there, I want you to realize there was life before the internet. And we didn't always carry our devices in our pockets. And so I had been living in North Carolina, and I had been traveling, like I said. And yes, there's certain parts of the United States I've been to that I can't wait to get back, and others I'm glad I've left. And so I ended up having this need to get somebody in my life. So back then, they had magazines to help you find people. And so I actually put an ad in this magazine, as well as answered some ads. And I ended up having this gentleman reach out to me and say, let's have dinner. So we got together, and we went out 2 or 3 times, and then something didn't quite feel right, but I wasn't sure what. And then I had this abrupt opportunity to go to Phoenix and to settle down into the family business, which was insurance. And I ended up living in Phoenix. And then a friend of mine says, "Hey, whatever happened to that guy?" Because it was, we were unpacking things, and I wrote him a letter. And then he's like, "Oh my gosh, yes, I've always wanted to live in Phoenix, fly back out to North Carolina." Went back out there, and we were together for the weekend. And he says, "Do you want to marry me?" And it was that quick. So basically 3 dates, didn't see each other for about 7 months. And then, "Would you marry me?" And he moved out to Arizona, and about 8 months later, we got married.
Wow, a magazine ad.
Yep.
That'll freak people too. And wow, and you said yes, and so you just thought, yeah, he seems great, why not? And just went for it, or wow.
Yeah, and my whole headspace was, I was of that age. I was about 27, 26 at the time.
Oh,
And
yeah.
my whole headspace and my whole looking at my family and what they had was, okay, now it's the time to get married. Now it's time to settle down. Now it's time to have, a family and to be with somebody. And I didn't want to be alone the rest of my life. And it's funny because of course hindsight's 2020, and I'm realizing that it's better to be alone than to be with somebody and wish you were alone. And so that kind of all transcribed, and it was good and ready to go. And it's funny because about 4 or 5 weeks before the wedding, he had moved out to Arizona. We had been living together just for a few months because, why should he get an apartment? We were going to be married. And I woke up in complete fear. And I had this gut feeling. I was like, what am I doing? Why am I doing this? And I went to work and I talked with my friend. She said, this is just typical pre-wedding jitters. Don't worry about it. Everything will be fine. Okay. So I said, all right, fine. And I just totally ignored that. And then we got married.
Yeah, and so many times, because again, our culture and this is what you do, and then you're supposed to find a man, and you're supposed to get married, and then you have your family, do your life, so it's kind of this thing. And then yes, when you're getting in later in your 20s, I've heard this so many times, who are like, I don't want to be alone. I want someone. I want that partner. And we are made for relationship, but again, when you're driven, like you were driven to, oh, this is part of the plan, this is how it's supposed to happen, you kind of start to overlook things. And how interesting that there were the signs there, which I've heard. So again, even of those of you who maybe are in that boat, you're about to get married, but you have these things, don't blow them off as, this is normal. No, if you've got some fears, then maybe you need to think and talk it over and communicate a little bit, because maybe it's not the right person or the right time. And so that's another thing there. Yeah, that even that could help encourage someone to really pay attention, because getting married is not like going on a date. It's there's that mental, emotional, spiritual connection, and then we got the legal connection and financial connections. So, getting married is not just like a date or living together. It even goes further than that. So, all right.
Well, you're right on that, because there's all different stages. Every single stage as you go along, it's easier to get out of the relationship as in the beginning. And the longer and longer you're together, the harder it is to get out of that relationship. And even the living together, I wish we had lived together, not with the intention that we were necessarily getting married, but just to learn about each other. Because what was happening that I didn't want to see, I was very blinded by what I didn't want to see. I felt things were going to change and things were going to be normal. He did drugs before we got together, and he promised me up and down that he was done with that life. He didn't want to do anything, didn't want to smoke marijuana, didn't want to do any of that. And I took him at his word. And so I felt, okay, fine, whatever this is here, things are they're just going to change. They're going to fall into that couple that my parents are. And just kind of a little side note on my parents, they just celebrated their 65th wedding anniversary. And they have been together for 65 years. And it's just, they do everything together. We often tease when somebody says, oh, I know your mother. I said, do you know my father? And they're like, no. I said, then you don't know my mother, because they are just always together. And so that was what I saw growing up. And I thought I could make that happen in my relationship.
Wow. And that is such a common theme. And I think that's why a lot of people live together. Not that I would ever encourage that, but I also see, but again, even that short time, I see that happen then even long term when people live together, because you get comfortable with certain things, or you're, comfortable, you have someone near you. But again, whether we're married, we're living with them, that's what we do. And again, the longer we ignore those little things and keep making excuses or justifying, or, just because of our hopes and our dreams, we're blinded to what's right in front of us. And we keep, many people get trapped in those relationships way longer than they should, because we keep hoping, right? Hoping things will just change, or they'll change. But That's the thing I think I've learned a lot over my few years being around is, the longer we're alive and the more things we go through, the dumber and more foolish we find out we were, ignorant, really, not dumb, ignorant of, we can barely, pay attention to things happening in our own life and acknowledge and make adjustments and, course corrections, or it takes us a long time anyhow. We certainly can't do it for other people. And I think that's a thing. A lot of times our hopes and our dreams kind of try to cover that up like, oh, it'll just get better. But, people have got to make those choices for themselves. And that can be a really difficult situation, obviously, in many different relationships. So, oh, sorry. Would you like to say something?
No, I was just gonna add, you also have to remember that I was born in the 60s and things were a different culture then.
Yes.
And like I said, my mom stayed at home, and now I'm trying to transition into that working woman and wife, and this is what I have to do. And I saw my mom do a lot of things for my dad, and that whole mental, we weren't strong enough to step into our own power at that point and realize that a lot of the things that I'm sharing today is because I have looked back and I can see it. I was very blinded at the time, and I wasn't really supported in a way that I could have risen out of that.
Good points too. So you're married, you marry this man that you barely know, and you start a life together. How long were you married with him?
21 years.
21 years. So what did that 21 years look like for you? How did that play out? How did you find out that 21 years was enough, that you came to that point where that was enough? What led you to that huge decision?
Well, looking back now, I see signs, but at the time, I didn't see all the signs evolve. I actually have, unfortunately, been diagnosed with PTSD, which I've overcome, thank goodness, without medication. But it was done in a way, it's called a trauma bond. And what a trauma bond is, it's an item that's like a punishment and reward system that's developed over time. And it's actually, typically the person is very narcissistic, or there's issues and they're controlling the other person. And trauma bonds are very real. They just don't happen overnight. So there's trauma, physical trauma, that can happen in an instant. Somebody can hit you, beat you, physical trauma. Those things happen immediately. Whereas a trauma bond is more of an emotional, and it goes over time and very, very slowly. So there were things that had happened that I wasn't realizing. And a lot of it was neglect, but I just accepted it because I thought that's the way things had to be. I didn't realize that this was all going on and was building. And I remember, especially when we lived down in Arizona before we moved back up here to Wisconsin, where there were many, many times where he would do his own thing all night long and I would do mine, and there was no cohesiveness. And I'm not saying that you shouldn't have your own life within your own relationship there in your marriage. No, but it was really, truly neglect. And he would actually make fun of the stuff that I would do because he would find it very boring, very stupid. He would tell me some of the things that I would watch on TV were just stupid, and how could I do this, and blah, blah, blah. And there was one time where he wanted to go out and I didn't want to go. And this really sat very, very difficult with me. He wanted me to go with him to the gentleman clubs. And I felt that that was just wrong on many, many levels. And so he would just go, which I even felt very awkward about that. And he would come home very late at night. I would get up in the morning, and he would be hungover, etc. And I remember one time I had really had enough and I said something. And all of a sudden he said, we have to go run some errands. So we got in his little car, which was a stick shift, which is really important. It was a fast car. And in Arizona, they have this thing, they call it ramping. And it's the highways are, each of the exits are about 1 mile apart, and they're built in such a way that you can go down the ramp, and then you go for just a little bit, and then you go up the ramp, and then you go down the ramp and up the ramp. And it's called ramping because you accelerate down and get that rush, and then you accelerate up to the top, and then you go straight down. It's very dangerous, but a lot of motorcycle people do that. A lot of people who want to be racing do this. And a lot of people also do it to avoid the traffic jams. It's their way of getting around the traffic. And so we were on the road, we were traveling. It was so fast, so unbelievable. The windows were down. I mean, he was going at least 90 to 100 miles an hour. I was pushed back up against the seat. I mean, I could feel the wind on my face, my cheek pulling out a little bit, and I was just frozen. I didn't know where we were going. I didn't know why we were going. And he was darting in and out of traffic, back and forth, back and forth. He'd run up on somebody and slam. And then all of a sudden we turned around and we came back. And he did the same thing going back, but we never went anywhere. We just went on this ride. And when we got back, he said, "You know why I did that?" And I'm like, no clue. He goes, "You need to learn to obey me. You need to learn to not question what I do. You need to learn to trust me. And that is all that is going to keep this marriage alive." Boom. And the stage was set. He was in control.
Wow. Yeah, thanks for sharing that story to give us a little insight of, what that really looks like. I love how you started out to explain the trauma bond, and because that was just a very simplistic, true view. It is really slow and you don't notice it. And it is just as damaging. And in some ways, I feel it's more damaging than, physical trauma or trauma, that you watch or see, because it's in that relationship, and it's very hard to see the signs because they're so subtle. And then again, when they become normal, when you're seeing these things, you can't connect them to see that the trauma is being caused like that. He was reminding you, where your place was and how you needed to respond for it. He was laying the law down because you obviously weren't understanding it and how he saw it. Thank goodness you weren't harmed in that situation, but physically, but mentally. Did you notice, is that something that you look back and notice now, or did you notice then that something is really wrong here at that time when that situation happened?
Sadly, I felt I was wrong.
Mm-hmm.
I felt that I was being the prude about the going out to gentlemen clubs.
Mm-hmm.
I was the one that wouldn't allow my husband to live his life. I was the one that was at fault, and I was the one that had to fix it. Go ahead.
Do you know how many years into the relationship this was about?
Oh, this was in the beginning of the relationship. We only lived in Arizona for 2 years. So this was within the first 12 months of our relationship that he set that stage.
Wow.
And then I found myself covering for him.
Mm-hmm.
And then we ended up moving back up here. And I never understood the why until somebody told me later when I was in therapy. And I went into therapy after the divorce for an extended period of time because I needed it. And I look at that as being the life-changing and open me up to what I need here.
Mm-hmm.
But we came back up here under the guise that I got sick in Arizona and couldn't live there anymore, and came back up here to Wisconsin. And that was true. I really did get ill down there, and staying down there probably wasn't the best thing for me. But there may have been other options than just coming back to Wisconsin. Now, I'm very grateful that my kids were raised here. I love this whole area. There's a lot of positives here. It's Midwest values go deep. But we came back up here and I never understood the why. And when I was in therapy one day, because as I haven't shared yet, the drugs didn't really go away. I just thought they did. And I was in therapy one day when my therapist asked, she goes, "Why did you guys come back up?" I explained, the story that we told people. And she goes, "Do you ever think that it could be because it was a drug deal go bad and your husband had to get out of the state?" And it was like, wow. And that makes total sense based on some other things that he revealed to me much later in our relationship.
Mm.
So that was early on, and that stage was set. And so now we come back up here and we have my family. And even going to family events, he didn't want to really participate. I never knew until after I was divorced how much my family disliked him.
Mm.
But I always felt that I had to be the peacemaker. I had to be the one to smooth things over. And, we went slow. I was the breadwinner. He would get fired from jobs because he would tell his boss to go fly. We'll use that term. And it wasn't quite that word, but I think you all know what I'm talking about. And he'd come home and I'd cover for this, thinking that the work was the jerk. And then abruptly one day he came home, and now we have kids, and we have two beautiful, beautiful children who are now grown adults. And we ended up, we had somebody come in to like help us because I worked and he worked. So we called her the nanny, but it was really, she was a more of an advanced babysitter, if you will, but she did a lot of stuff with us. I'd stay home in the morning. She'd come right after school, when school was over around noon, then he'd be home. So we all kind of worked together. And he had popped job to job to job. And he ended up having, one day, totally unbeknown to me, he came home, he fired the nanny, and he decided to be the stay-at-home dad. And we didn't have this conversation, but I had to accept it. And I just kind of did accept it and went, okay, fine, I'll just ramp up what I'm doing. So now not only did I keep the house clean, did I do all the cooking, all the shopping, I also made all the money, and I had to ramp that up to cover his costs. And it was just awful. Finally, after a while, we bought this land way out in the middle of nowhere, and we had a lot of people. We sat on it for the longest time, and we had people offer us money to buy it because we weren't building on it. It was 3.5 acres. And no, he was real adamant. So eventually we built on it. Now I've learned the reason why is so he could grow pot out there and nobody would notice. And the whole drugs things came back. And when he revealed that to me one day, I got mad. And he just said, well, sorry, I can't live my life without that. Yeah. So it was really, and all these slow, small signs evolved. And the entire time I kept thinking, this was the life I chose. I committed to marriage. I can't break that commitment.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, again, another thing so many people can connect to and understand because they get in this situation and because it really meant something to you. It was important, but so when is it right to break that off? When is it right? When it's supposed to be forever and you wanted it to be forever and be right, but something's not working here. This isn't like your mom and dad's marriage. Something went wrong. And I'm so sorry you had to go through those years of that suffering and imprisoned in a way, emotionally, I believe, in that relationship with him. So if you're so convinced or accepting, I should say, of this is how it is, how in the world did you get to that point, around that 21 years to be able to begin to walk away? I mean, did something really horrific happen, or did he choose to leave you? How in the world did you get free from this years of bondage with him?
He actually is the one that asked for the divorce, but there was a lot of things that were leading up to this, things that I was accepting. He was very heavily into pornography. I caught all of this. So now we're going to roll the tape way ahead, and we raised the kids, and I've learned from my kids some things that he did. Like one day he got in a fist fight with the car in front of him, in front of the kids. I found out he was taking the kids out into some areas to walk around nature when really he was checking on his drugs and whatnot.
Sure.
And he had our kids with, and I didn't know any of this because otherwise I putting my kids at harm were something that would have really sparked me to say, okay, we are done here. I didn't see any of that because he convinced the kids. Well, the kids never realized that's what he was doing out there. He fooled them as well and kept them under control.
And
So
you're
now,
out working, so you're not seeing it.
yeah, exactly. I'm out working,
Yeah.
I'm out doing all this. So now we roll the tape ahead. And I noticed one day that he is watching a lot of pornography, and he got very upset with me because I wouldn't watch it with him. And this is when the computers now were coming around, the internet was a thing now. And he would actually download pornography and save it on the computer in folders. And I kind of found that one day because I am very techie, and I searched that and I found it and I was horrified. Then I found that he was also on some of these dating sites that were very adult orientated, we'll say it that way.
Mm-hmm.
And it was just awful. And I busted him on it. I said, what is this? He goes, it's nothing. It's just sex. It's nothing. So don't worry about it. It's just sex. And I accepted that, where he was separating the difference between sex and love.
Mm-hmm.
And he got very, very upset when I drew the line and said I would not be a swinger.
Mm-hmm.
And it was just awful. So then one day I found that through all of these sites that he had been on, he actually started meeting up with people. And I found one in particular that he was cheating with. And I called him on it. You know, first he lied, and then I called him on it. And it was just at a time where things weren't really good. And so I accepted it.
Mm-hmm.
And it was just awful. And he said, well, she's like my surrogate therapist. And I'm thinking, oh my gosh, I go to lunch with my friends. I don't go do that with my friends, you know, to have companionship. And that was the one I caught. And so then finally, I think it was that he just wanted his freedom to be around many, many women, and I wasn't having it, that he said, I want a divorce. And I ended up realizing at that point how traumatized I was.
Mm-hmm.
And I accepted it. And it took me a long time in therapy to answer your question of when is it enough to say enough?
Mm-hmm.
And my therapist shared this with me, which is what's gotten me to be able to accept that divorce and to be able to say, okay, it was a ruse of what it was. And it's when you make your commitment, but the other person is breaking theirs,
Mm-hmm.
you don't have to keep your commitment anymore.
Mm-hmm.
And that was life-changing for me.
Yeah.
And I learned that, and that holds true with everything, with friendships, with business relationships, with marriage, with anything of, you know, an intimate relationship. When you go into it with both having the same commitment and the same agreement,
Mm-hmm.
that's awesome. When one person breaks that, the other one is given
Mm-hmm.
the opportunity to say, I don't have to accept this because you've now changed the agreement.
Yeah, I
And
call that
that is
boundaries.
what really,
Mm-hmm. Healthy boundaries. Yeah.
yes.
And knowing when you
Yes.
are just putting out this all the work and no one else is returning it, and yes, and to help you see that you are worth so much more than that you don't have to work all that hard just so someone would stay with you, that you are more valuable than that other people would want to there would be others that would want to replicate that for you because they enjoy you and want you. And yeah, so from what I see, it basically, yes, he wanted to do what he wanted. And basically he had escalated his clubbing and pornography to those meetings that, well, he didn't need you anymore because now he has multiple others. So might as well get divorced and then, you know, accept that he's an idiot because he was leaving the money, right? He's also leaving the money so he could go do what he wanted. So who knows? But again, he was making obviously lots and lots of bad choices, and hurting you, hurting your children. And again, how I didn't actually know this part of your story. And again, with what we do, working with women that have been exploited, that have been sold, have been in strip clubs and in pornography, and what it does to them because they are, they're human just like you and I, and on a normal level would never desire to be in that position. But because of other life circumstances and bad choices and all the mix and different individuals, they are. And because we all want to be loved. We don't want to be used. We don't want to be seen as just one thing. There are multiple facets to what make you valuable, not just sex, as he would say it, just sex. There is no just sex. There is, the emotional connection, the mental connection, the presence, the care, the concern. Anyhow, so I guess what a blessing that he was a fool some more and decided to ask for a divorce, because what a blessing for you. Because again, often it's normal when you have that trauma bond, and when you have those things just come in so subtly and you just accept them and they become your normal. Another thing I talk about a lot is our normals. That was your normal and you accepted it, though it's not really what you wanted. Oh, well, this is where I am, what am I going to do? People don't get out of those situations unless something tragic or life altering happens. And he made the life altering decision, which was, again, fabulous for you. So can you tell me a little bit about your counseling and this therapist? Because still often so many people, maybe some people would say, oh yeah, she needed that, she definitely needed that, but I don't need that. But really the purpose of a therapist, the purpose of a counselor, is to help you walk through things that, again, just as a friend, like we can easily see things different in you, or concerns for you than you can't see because it's part of your everyday life. But us on the outside looking in as just another person can see things. And that's often what a counselor does, with some special training and knowing how to lead you and tools to use, can help people see those things with fresh eyes and ask how to alter, to make better choices with that. So how did that look for you? What was that therapy? What was some treatments that really helped you break free of all those bondages and those lies and justifications that you had accepted for so long?
So it's, you are correct. I normalized the abnormal. And that was something that I wasn't seeing, I wasn't hearing, I was covering. It was just unbelievable. So then I finally decided to go into therapy. And I ended up actually talking to a couple of therapists. And the one that I gravitated to is very holistic in her approach. And we started doing this treatment called EMDR. Mm-hmm. And it's eye movement rapid desensitization. And that whole process is the reason why I was able to overcome PTSD without medication, is because it made me look at who I was. And a lot of it is, talk therapy is very good, but you have to get deep to heal and to realize where these things came from. And I literally moved into my brother's basement and stayed there for 3 years. I mean, yeah, I went out to work. Yeah, I did this. And I actually left the job that I was in with my career and said, this is part of the trauma as well. It was all linked together. Mm-hmm. And I totally shifted careers. And I feel much better because of it. I was kind of bound in that career as well. So things happened that I had to leave. I couldn't do this. And so we did these things called these light treatment, or we did light treatments as well. Color light, which is a color puncture. Light treatment is, they use acupuncture points, but instead of acupuncture or acupressure, it's light color. Mm-hmm. And so it's very, it's amazing how it will change things on a cellular level, because we actually trap our trauma in our cells and we end up developing triggers. And yeah, I'm much, much better now, but there are still triggers that I have occasionally. And my current husband will recognize that. And he's like, wait a minute, this is not me, this is him. And so that it makes sense.
Yes. I should have brought this up before, but I want to make clear because some people have not a good understanding what PTSD is. You know, they've heard it for veterans, you know, what post-traumatic stress syndrome, it happens from trauma. And so trauma is, yes, something exploding, someone being killed in front of you, like we hear with, you know, people that serve our country, with police, with even firefighters. They all experience PTSD. The thing is, if it gets dealt with, that traumatic event gets dealt with right away, you won't suffer from PTSD. You don't have to. That's what they've learned if they treat it right away. Now, when you endure trauma after trauma after trauma after trauma, or trauma continues, it's just one long thing of trauma, like your relationship, it gets more ingrained, the way our brain signals, the way we process those triggers, they become more embedded, ingrained in us. And so we suffer from PTSD. So many people suffer from PTSD from all sorts of things. It is not just from one sudden thing. They're often actually, I'd say a majority of them is more like things like situations like you have endured, Nancy, that suffer PTSD. So I want others to understand who don't get that connection, that yes, you get PTSD from trauma, and that can be ongoing, sudden, repetitive. The more repetitive it is, the more ingrained it becomes, and the harder to break free from all those things that your body has now learned and made as normal. So I just wanted to go back to that. And then the EMDR, I love that. It's a fabulous option. And then light, color. Another simplest thing is, you know, your brain is so complex. And yes, there are certain colors, as hence why even just talking about what colors you like, what colors you want to paint your room, have such an impact on emotion. So if you just connect that therapy with just those simplistic things, you can begin to understand the complexities that have been learned to utilize color and light and other treatments to help open up things for us to process and deal with better.
You know, it's interesting because what people don't realize is that you're very correct. Trauma, most people think is an incident, a car accident, somebody hit them, somebody, you know, beat them up or stole from them or whatever, right? But most PTSD trauma is actually like a coffee pot. It doesn't just fill up instantly. It's drip by drip by drip. And all of a sudden, the coffee pot is full. So your brain is this coffee pot. And the trauma is continuously put in, and all of a sudden the neurons and the connections can't work anymore. And when trauma happens, it actually breaks the end of the nerves and it can't complete the thought. So what EMDR does, if you will, it kind of pours some coffee out of your coffee pot, and it finds a little area, and it then looks at it and says, okay, so this is where the trauma happened and the false belief about yourself. I had very low self-esteem, very low confidence. Oh, and I showed like I had it. I faked it till I made it. And it wasn't who I was. I would go home and cross that threshold and become this different person from what the outside saw, because I didn't want the outside to know what was going on in my house. I wasn't lying to my friends, but I was avoiding them. And I wouldn't tell them, you know, nobody knew about the cheating. Nobody knew about the pornography. Nobody knew about his addictions. And
that's shameful, you know, that shame, you'd have to deal with that. And yeah, again, so you can survive, you allow certain things to survive the day, to get through to the next day. Yep.
Exactly. Now you'll always have the memories, but I can sit here today and talk about these things without feeling the emotional trauma, because I have gone through this treatment. And so my coffee pot got emptied a little bit at a time. And what happens is through EMDR is that you remember the trauma, but then you release the trauma, install the proper belief, the way it should have turned out, and it completes the neurons. And so then the connection comes back, the hemispheres in your brain come back together. And I was able to release a lot of traumas that happened at that time. Mm-hmm. And so eventually my coffee pot is empty for the most part. And it allowed me to release that, which opened up some beautiful things in my life.
Awesome.
I never would have had these things come to me had I not gone through that step. And it's funny because one day he actually sat down and we had a long conversation about everything. It was right around when the divorce was coming about. We sat down and talked like we were two buddies having a beer. And he told me everything from our first, in the beginning of our marriage, when I had to move to Wisconsin before he did because he was closing up the house down there. And he said, remember when that happened? Yeah, well, I went and I got some hookers. And I'm like, wow, that's the one time he told me. And then he was telling me about another time where we were on vacation, but he swung in. I was at the hotel waiting for him to come join me. He says, yeah, I just popped in the neighborhood and bought some crack because I didn't know what that was like. And I wanted to try it. I don't really like it. And then I've done this. And he just like unloaded everything. And it was, I don't know why, but he did. And at that time, it didn't make me feel better, but it brought so many things into therapy that helped me understand he broke our agreement in the beginning. And I normalized the abnormal and accepted it because I thought that was as good as it got. And I deserved what I laid my bed with. And I deserved this because that's what I attracted. And boy, was I wrong.
Got that right. Oh, that's good. And it's funny, of all the different trainings and things I've listened to on trauma, I haven't heard that coffee pot analogy, and I love it. It's great. But yes, again, the truth is painful to know all the truth. I'm sure there was some more pain in some of that, but yet again, the truth still can help us process through better. And yes, EMDR, isn't that amazing? How our brains were created and how they can become damaged, and yet how complex and amazing they were created that they can be corrected and repaired and fixed. And wow, I love, that's why I love learning about trauma, because it blows my brain, when people have suffered through so much, like with the women that I work with that have been sold as products and controlled and owned by someone, and how all these things are broken in them, and yet they can be repaired. I love it. They show brain scans of concentration camp survivors and sex trafficking survivors, and they're the two brain scans that look the most damaged compared to any other traumas. But either way, just showing that trauma. But then after going through processes like EMDR and counseling and therapy, and them learning to make good choices and learning to see the truth about themselves and their value, that then they can take pictures of the brain again and begin to see how it looks like a healthy, normal brain. How amazing and how beautiful. And then your life as example, like you said, now there's beautiful areas in your life you didn't even know that you could have, and you get to experience. And I imagine now, in learning more about yourself and valuing yourself, your relationship with your children as they've gotten older, I would assume has improved greatly just because of how you view life and yourself.
Oh, yeah, definitely. And you're right. Hearing it at the time didn't make me feel good, but not knowing actually wouldn't allow me that space to grow and heal and realize I wasn't the one at fault. I wasn't the one that had that problem. Now, you've known me for a while now, and until I said something, you never knew that I suffered from this because I've released so much of it. I've gotten rid of most. I will never say that I got rid of all because sometimes it does pop up. However, I have the tools to handle it now.
Yes.
I meditate. I know what is my stuff and what's the other person's stuff, and how I may have triggered it in them, but I don't have to own it. I don't have to take it on for
Yes.
me.
Oh, very good.
And it's mine to worry about my life, and they get to worry about their life. I mean, how do they say that? Not my circus, not my monkeys. And so it's all good, and that's what's come out of this. So yeah, it was a terrible time. I don't want to repeat it. It was awful. I went through what I had to do. I had to do the work, though. That's the thing. You have to take that first step and step into the therapist office. And don't be afraid to get rid of your therapist if they're not serving you. They are there to serve you.
Mm.
And you don't have to do everything that the therapist tells you to do if it doesn't sit right. And that's the thing. We'll go all the way back to the beginning. Had I listened to my gut, had I listened to the red flag, to me, the red flag was the pot. It was the original drugs. I did not want that in my life. I did not want to have that in my life. And I always said, I've never done drugs. I don't care for them. I don't want them in my life. And I had my therapist said, but they are in your life now, because I didn't listen to that red flag.
Yes.
And it is so important to listen to your gut and realize you will never change the red flag. The red flag will always be what brings you down. It'll be waved in your face every chance that you have. But now I don't accept the red flags. Now, and I do that across my life, my personal relationships, my business relationships, whenever I'm making decisions. If it doesn't feel right, I listen to my gut, because who else is going to take care of me than me?
Mm-hmm.
And now I have a great relationship with my children. I always have. They don't have such a good relationship with their father, and that's between them. They're grown adults. They can choose to do what they want to do with that. I never stop it, but they are educated. They know some of what happened. More and more as they get older, it slips out of what it is.
Sure.
And now I'm in a relationship, and I'm married to this wonderful man who is just gives me the world, and I give him the world. We take care of each other. It is now a collective. So before, my relationship was 90-10. 90% of the marriage was me, 10% was him. Now it's 50-50. And I'm not saying that he was 100% the reason the divorce happened. I will take blame and responsibility in that as well, because it does take two people, but I didn't make the change. I just kept accepting, hiding, and burying. Now, oh my gosh, life is wonderful. I've got a whole new career. I own a couple companies. I love what I do. I enjoy meeting with people. I can go out in public again and not feel shamed. I don't feel like people are staring at me or wondering what I'm doing wrong. I don't feel judged. And people are going to judge you, but it's a matter of whether or not you allow that to come in. It's just the way that it is. And the gentleman in my life now, my family loves him. I remember as walking down the aisle with my father on my wedding day, and he turns to me and he goes, "Well, you got this one right." And it was like, okay. And when we got divorced, the original divorce, my family was all, "Oh, it's about time. Oh my gosh, it's about time." Like, did nobody say anything? And I guess that's the second piece.
Ooh,
Don't be
good
afraid
work.
to tell people.
Yes.
You don't have to necessarily be very pushy about it, but to sit down and have a conversation over coffee and say, "I love you so much. This is what I see." And realize that I'm
Yes.
doing this because I've been there. And this is
Being
what
a real friend. We need, yes, we talk about that too, about talking, if we really care, then obviously, you have a good family, and again, we're all human. We screw up and we drop the ball on things, but I love that you brought that up. Yes, we need to be real friends. If we see something that concerns us, we don't have to push you out of our life or tell you how bad you are, but just, yeah, like you said, "Hey, I care about you. This is something that concerns me," and leave it there, because again, it's up to you, but at least we're acknowledging and saying, "Hey, we see this. Do you see this?" And pray for them, help them to see that, and open up their eyes. I love that. And I'm so thankful you brought up that other point I wanted to bring up about you had multiple therapists and you chose the one, because yes, just like in every profession, so this isn't just about what you prefer to in every profession. There are people should not be in their profession. Okay. They stink. So there's those, and then there's, again, different personalities and whatever, and paying attention. Yes. And I love it. You said it all. Pay attention to those red flags. When you feel that uncomfortableness, when you feel something that you should question, stop. For people like me who just want to go, slow down, pay attention, and process through it. Don't just throw it out the door and keep moving. stop, slow down, pay attention. So I love that. You have a good message for us as individuals to really pay attention, and also to be a good friend, and to be a good family member, to really talk to one another about things that we see. And, and if we're wrong, we're wrong. That if we're good friends, we can work through it. If we saw something and we thought it was a different thing, then you can set us straight, or you can let us know that, no, this is really what's happening. And I love that. So there's so much to get out of your story. And obviously, you are definitely free. Obviously, you've been empowered. Obviously, you have grown up. And that's what I talk about too, about growing up, learning, continuing to grow. We ain't dead until we're dead. And we're supposed to keep learning throughout this journey. We're going to have setbacks. We're going to have bad seasons. We can keep still hoping and dreaming, because it's not over till it's over. And if we're willing to make those hard choices, like you did over and over, you had to work through things and choose what you're really going to believe, and choose how you're really going to respond, and then make good habits, and noticing those triggers, noticing that that's their garbage, not my garbage. You're becoming healthy, you're becoming more whole, you're becoming all that God has created you to be, instead of settling and just, getting angry, or again, maybe making bad decisions, and getting yourself into more trouble, as some people, then begin to take drugs to escape, because they don't want to deal, they want to escape. So it was very empowering to listen to your story and listen to what you went through. And so, can I go back again? You said you lived at your brother's for about 3 years. Was it 3 years to work through this and to become healthy? How long that's another thing we should know to prepare if we're in this situation. How long for you? Because now, just to clarify, just because it took you this long doesn't make it take that long. It may take longer. It depends on your situation of what you've got to work through, but it is a process. And for you, how long was this process that when you began to feel more whole and healthy again?
Well, you're right, because everybody's coffee pot is bigger or smaller.
Coffee pot. Gotta use the coffee pot.
Always about your coffee pot. I was there for 3 years, and I was in intense therapy. I was going 2, sometimes 3 times a week.
Okay.
And there were days I didn't want to go, but I went anyway. And there were days that I couldn't wait to get there, because I had to share the small win that might have come about.
Yes.
And it took me the longest time to realize that it wasn't my fault. And actually, this is my message. I'm being the friend to every listener right now.
All right.
And I'm telling them that something's not right, and you feel it and you know it, because your feelings are never wrong. And so I went for a long time, and then I ended up going down to just once a week. And that went on for a very, very long time. And probably at about 6 years, I started going more to every other week. And then eventually, about 8-year period of time for me. Now, that doesn't mean that that's you. And there are resources to help, because I realize insurance companies look at the whole mental health in a very unhealthy way. And you need to still put that aside and find a way to work with therapists that suit you. You don't necessarily have to work with the therapist that's just in your network and they said, I can only have 10 visits and I should be done. I'm telling you, that's bunk. But if that's all you have, do the 10 at least. Get started. Take that first step and realize that it's your journey and it's your life. And there's no reason why, if something else comes up, say you're in therapy and then you leave therapy because you're okay, and something else comes up, go back. It's okay.
Yeah,
it's not a one and done type thing. So yeah, it took me about 8 years. And I allowed so many positive things to happen. I ended up getting my own place to live. And then I found, a career that I enjoyed. I met my now husband. That relationship, it took him almost a year plus to ask me out. We were just casually talking here and there, bumping into each other. And then it took 4 years before he asked me to marry him. And then it took a year and a half before we actually, not quite a year and a half, a little over a year to actually get married. So I did things differently this time.
hmm And yeah, I love how you said it was a process. It wasn't all horrible until then, but it was a process. Slowly, just as you slowly went down into the pit, you slowly were able to pull yourself out of that pit. And none of us like process. We want everything now, but that's how we think it should be. But again, that's not reality usually. There are a few things that can happen quickly, but in general, there's a process. And if you just keep your head looking forward and don't lose hope and keep working, even there are going to be setbacks, keep going through the process and you will rise above it. You can work through it because you are valuable, you are worth it. And just as Nancy and so many others, you will find so much more joy, so much more peace, so much more hope and pleasure in living your life day to day when you work through that process. So thank you so much, Nancy, for joining me and being so open and sharing your empowering story with us today. I hope you have a fantastic week, and we look forward to who we get to interview next. But thank you, Nancy. Have a great day.
Thank you, Krista.